Hi, everyone.
Brian Davis and Denny Sibley here with you from Spark Rental.
Welcome, everyone. Last week, we talked about 7 signs that you're financially stable and 3 that you aren't. Hope everybody had a chance to go over that and maybe decide to make some changes so that you're in the better list. And what are we discussing today, Brian?
So this week, we're talking about the possibility of an eviction crisis looming on the horizon, which, there's been a lot of press about that. We're going to dive into some of the data to see, is this actually a looming problem? And if so, how much of a problem is it? So as you guys join us, let us know where you're tuning in from. We always love to hear that stuff and get some questions and participation from you guys. We have started releasing this as a weekly podcast, but unlike your typical podcast, we do not record this in a studio and have it all polished and perfect and edited just so before we release it. We do broadcast these live because we want to have this interactive, have this be about you guys just as much as it is about us. And we're willing to sacrifice the perfect polish on that. So on that note, Denny, let's start by just walking through the latest CDC ban on evictions that was announced through the end of 2020. They just announced this a week or two back. So Who does this apply to? What are the details? Walk us through this ban on evictions by the CDC.
First of all, the fact that the CDC is even getting involved in this is a bit odd, to say the least. But it is for renters that earn no more than $99,000, so under $100,000, and
for single renters.
For single, but for the total for joint, no more than 198. The difference in this than the other one, the other bans that were in were those didn't require as much proof, for lack of a better word, that COVID was affecting you in a whole. So a lot of people were getting away with it, even if there was, whatever. They just didn't feel like working or whatever. Where there is, and Brian, we were just talking about this, it's left up to the states to decide how they're going to enforce this, but there are definitive enforcement rules in place that you have to show that you are impacted by COVID, that you are trying to do everything you can to get housing assistance, and that if you were to be evicted, you would be on the street and homeless. So this is not as easy as just getting, any of the other assistances or whatnot.
So to recap, single people can earn no more than $99,000 in order to qualify for this protection. Married couples filing jointly can earn no more than $198,000 to qualify for this eviction ban protection. Denny, if you can walk us through, there are a couple requirements here. There are 4 main requirements that tenants have to meet in order to qualify for this. Just walk us really quickly through each one of these 4 requirements.
Again, you have to make sure that you have done everything you can to apply for any available government assistance or housing programs. You also need to make sure that you can't pay the rent, and that you have to show that your household income has significantly dropped, that you are at a loss for hours or wages, you're laid off, or you have an extraordinary amount of medical expenses, most likely due to COVID. You're doing the best that you can to work with your landlords to make whatever payments that you can. And that if you are evicted, it would leave you homeless. So that's very gray area, but if you have somebody else you can move in with or something like that, that would void this out.
Yeah, and it's hard for landlords to be able to disprove any of these things, right? I mean, so tenants, they go online and they download, there's an affidavit that they download from the CDC, and they fill out this affidavit, stating each of these items and, swearing to it by signing this affidavit. Now it's left up to the states, whether landlords can request documentation from the tenants to try to verify these statements, to make sure that the tenant actually has these hardships and qualifies for the protection. So, like everything else in landlord-tenant law in the US, this very much comes down to your state, and sometimes even your city, and how landlord or tenant-friendly the laws are there. So
not
keep that
to
in mind.
mention, eventually things are going to come into play if two tenants aren't treated the same. So then we have that fair housing stuff that could enter into this. So it should be interesting to see how the states handle this. But yeah, you're going to have to go to your states and make sure that you're checking to see exactly what proof you are allowed to get and document. Also, this doesn't have anything to do with any other type of eviction. So if you have somebody that is conducting illegal activity, causing a noise or a nuisance, or destroying your property, that doesn't fly on this. This is just people that are affected by loss of employment or wages because of COVID.
Right. So this only affects eviction for non-payment of rent, doesn't affect eviction for other lease violations. And it's worth pointing out that this eviction ban does not relieve the tenant of the obligation to pay their rent. The tenant still owes the rent, and they still rack up late fees and all of the rest of it. But the landlord just can't enforce it. They just can't evict them yet. So come January, back rents and late fees will still be enforceable and due to the landlord, barring, future changes on this, which are very possible. I mean, the rules keep changing throughout 2020.
Right. It's true. And then who knows what other organization will pop in here and have their own say in this. So,
right.
And the
Right.
sad thing is that while your tenants are accumulating this rent, and it's very nice that they're saying that the tenants still owe the rent, but the likelihood is that it's very hard for a renter to catch up when they're that behind. So.
Right. Now, it's worth mentioning here that tenants are not as far behind on rents as you might expect. And we do have some data here to walk through. So at first glance, the numbers are not pretty, but you dive a little deeper into these and they're actually not as bad as you might expect. So here's the latest figures. So 32% of renters across the country failed to make a full on-time rent payment in the first week of September. So almost a third of renters in the US did not make a full on-time rent payment within the first week of September, which sounds pretty bad. For context, in August, that number was 34%. In July, that number was 35%. And by the way, this data is from Apartment List, and I'll link to that here in the comments in case you guys want to take a look at the raw data. Send a little link here.
So at least it's going down a bit.
Well, that's true. Now, with that being said, by the end of the month, over the last few months, most of these tenants had actually caught up and paid their rents in full. So August, last full month available here, by the end of August, only 10% of tenants had not paid their August rent in full. And of the tenants who still owe back rent, only half of them owe more than $1,000. Half of tenants who are behind on rent owe less than $1,000, which is something that is manageable for most of them to catch up eventually. Unlike, Denny, what you and I were just talking about a minute ago, if tenants fall $5,000 behind in back rents, that's going to be a lot harder for them to catch up. But under $1,000 in back rent owed, that's a lot more manageable to catch up.
It is, and this is very surprising, actually. It's nice to hear. I mean, it's not nice to hear that people are behind, but it's nice to hear that the numbers aren't as high as even I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, and if we dive into these even deeper and compare 2020's rent collection figures to previous years, it actually, the situation looks even, I hate to use the word better, but less bad. So switching gears to a different data source here, looking at data from the National Multifamily Housing Council, NMHC, so they show that 94.5% of apartment renters had paid either their full or partial August rents by the end of August. Now, one thing that's worth noting here, that does include partial rent payments, so take that with a grain of salt. But that figure, 94.5% of renters, that is only 1.3 percentage points lower than in August 2019, a year earlier, pre-pandemic. So in August 2019, that figure was 95.8% of apartment tenants had paid either full or partial rent by the end of August. So 94.5% this August, 95.8% last August. So not a big difference, 1.3 percentage points difference. So it's two things worth pointing out about that data. One is that this is just on apartment renters, does not include single family renters. And again, that number does include partial rent payments, which we're going to talk more about in a minute. Before we jump into that, the latest data from NMHC is that rents collected in the first week of September did drop a little bit after the CDC announced that eviction moratorium. So, the CDC tells landlords that they can't evict, tells tenants that they will not be evicted, and the percent of tenants who paid their rent in the first week of the month did fall, fell by more than 3 percentage points. It fell to 76.4% of tenants who paid their rent in the first week of September, compared to 79.3% of tenants who paid their rent in the first week of August. So, as soon as that eviction moratorium was announced for the rest of the year, fewer tenants did pay their rent in full in the beginning of
Does that include single family, or is that still?
No, that's still apartment renters.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just apartment renters. So let's talk about these partial rent payments for a second, because this has been a theme throughout the pandemic. So half of tenants who are behind on rent have either negotiated or are in the process of negotiating a rent payment plan with their landlord. So that's 49%. That's compared to 18% of tenants who have been turned down for a payment plan with their landlord, and 33% of tenants who are behind on rents haven't even bothered contacting their landlord to try to work one out. So that data, by the way, is from Apartment List. So keep that in mind. And by the way, I'll also share a link here to the NMHC data, so you guys can check that out as well. So half of tenants who are behind on rent have negotiated a payment plan. 18% of tenants who are behind on rent have been turned down, and the other third of tenants who are behind on rents haven't bothered contacting their landlord to try to work anything out. So that goes to show that a lot of landlords here are going out of their way to try to negotiate payment plans with their tenants, keep them in place. Now, what's interesting here to me is that data, and this data is a little tricky to come by because evictions have been restricted in most of the US in most of 2020. But evictions in 2020 have actually lagged historic levels, even when you isolate for areas where evictions are allowed or were allowed before the CDC moratorium. So Princeton did a study of 17 cities in the US where evictions were allowed, evictions were continuing during the pandemic. And they found that of those 17 cities, 16 of them showed lower eviction rates than the historic norms. Only one city was showing higher than normal eviction rates. And I'll pass a link to that study as well here in the notes.
So do you think that any of this has to do with some of the pandemic unemployment and that kind of thing?
No question. Yeah, no, I mean, so this is really all about the benefits. So as part of the CARES Act, as you guys probably remember, it extended unemployment benefits from typically 26 weeks keep in mind, unemployment benefits are operated on the state level, but most states offer unemployment benefits for half a year, for 26 weeks. The CARES Act extended that by an extra 13 weeks, so 39 weeks. And it also, the CARES Act guaranteed on a nationwide level that even in states that have shorter unemployment benefit periods, it guaranteed unemployed workers benefits for a minimum of 39 weeks. So people are able to collect their unemployment benefits for longer. And then, of course, there was also that very controversial extra $600 a week benefit that was tacked on to the existing unemployment benefits,
Right.
which was very, very much politically controversial. We won't get into that.
No.
But yeah, as long as but this is why so many tenants are still able to pay their rents, right? Is because of the extra benefits. Now they're expensive as all hell for the public tax dollars, but
Right.
that has been able to keep the rents largely flowing to landlords in the pandemic. Now, how long the government, both on the federal and on the state levels, will be able to keep shelling out these benefits. That's another story. How long they will keep shelling out these benefits, another story. Will there be another stimulus check? These are all, questions that are up in the air.
And
But
unfortunately, largely, these evictions and future evictions are going to be kind of dependent upon that, which
right.
a lot of your stats show, really.
Right. Now, the good news is that no politician wants to be the one sitting there holding the bag saying, we're in the middle of the pandemic saying, we're cutting off benefits, because that hurts that politician right here and now. Whereas the paying the bill for all of these public benefits, that is a problem for future politicians, right? I mean, that's a bill that's going to have to be paid a few years, a decade down the line from now. These politicians will be out of office by then, so they're just going to keep shelling out the money because it doesn't really hurt them to keep shelling out the money. It does hurt them to stop the benefits. So we're going to end up with a huge bill for all these benefits one day, but that day is not today. And I think we're going to keep seeing these benefits going until the financial and public health crises have passed. So in summary here, I actually don't think we will see an eviction crisis, largely because I think these benefits are going to keep flowing. So,
But as you
Jenny, what are your
said,
thoughts?
well, I'm just thinking of what you're saying, that when we have, further down the line, those new politicians are going to have to deal with this, and eventually we
They'll
can't.
raise taxes. They're going
Right.
to raise taxes on all of us
They
eventually.
are, but we also can't keep them going on forever and ever. So is this going to catch up? Is this going to be maybe we're not seeing it as the big problem now, but is it a delayed reaction?
Well, yeah, I mean, these benefits are definitely kicking the can down the road a little bit, in hopes that the economy recovers and ideally that we have a vaccine, so that the economy can replace these jobs, and so we don't have to have all these people still on unemployment benefits. But like you said, Denny, that is a risk. The pandemic and its recession could extend longer than the government's willingness or ability to keep paying out these benefits, and that is a risk for landlords, for tenants, for everybody.
Right.
So on that note, let's talk about 3 quick ways that landlords can protect themselves against rent defaults with their tenants. So, Denny, why don't you take this one away?
Definitely, you have to screen your tenants so aggressively now. It's not even a choice. You just got to do it. And one of the things that we often overlook is how long somebody is working for a company, because that's important right now. I was just looking at applications last night for a rental I'm renting for somebody, and I had like 10 applications for this apartment, and all of them had decent credit, but some of them, didn't have very long employment history, and I had to take that in. You have to take that into consideration now. You
Now
want
more than ever.
Yeah. And you definitely want to make sure there's somebody who pays their rent, is serious about it, because I see it in our group still, and it cracks me up sometimes, but I'll see somebody list somebody's criteria there, like anonymously, and they'll say they had an eviction 3 years ago. Guess what? They're going to have an eviction again, or at least you're not going to take top priority. Definitely. So, yeah, I know I sound like a broken record with that, but it's so important.
100%. Yeah, screen your tenants so aggressively right now. I mean, we said that during normal times, it's true then, it's doubly true now. All right, Denny, what about rent default insurance? Is that an option to protect landlords?
Absolutely. And I have to say, Brian, I was a bit skeptical on that when we first, were talking about it and looking into it. But now it's a great protection in place. So why not? I mean, build it into your expenses so you're still coming out ahead. And then if something happens, you're good.
Yeah, I mean it's a few $100 a year, and for that few $100, you can sleep at night knowing that if your tenants stop paying the rent, the insurance kicks in and starts paying it until you can get the tenant out and start collecting from a new tenant. So
And the bottom line is a lot. We all sit here and think, oh, a landlord doesn't need the money, but we don't know. As a landlord, you too might be facing, a job loss or because of COVID or whatnot.
You always need the money. I mean,
Right.
these are financial investments that are designed to generate income, and if they're not generating income, then you've shelled out hundreds of thousands of dollars at a loss for no reason, right?
Absolutely.
So we've included a link there to Steady, which it's the only rent default insurance company that is still operating right now that I'm aware of.
So jump on that right now.
Absolutely. And what's the third and final way that landlords can protect themselves against rent defaults during this crisis?
Well, it's reporting rents to credit bureaus, which is going to be coming soon to our website, our app. And that is, for a tenant who wants to maintain their credit rating, or even a tenant that starts out with not a great credit rating, but they're building it, it definitely gives them incentive and push to make sure that they're paying rent on time.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about reporting rent payments to the credit bureaus is that it's both a carrot and a stick, right? So if the tenant does what they're supposed to do, then they get rewarded with better credit.
Right.
If they don't do what they're supposed to do, if they don't pay the rent on time, then they get penalized for it.
Right.
So yeah, it's a great way that tenants can reward good tenants and penalize bad tenants.
Absolutely.
All right, Denny, any final thoughts before we wrap things up for today's episode?
I think it's really important to not wait until you're in this predicament as a landlord. I would contact your state and see what kind of proof that you may need so that you're ready just in case. Yeah, that's it. And keep an eye on this stuff because it changes, like Brian said, daily almost.
I know.
I mean, who would have thought that, if you told me 20 years ago that the CDA is going to be,
CDC.
I mean, the CDC, I'm sorry, is going to be deciding whether we can or not. Yeah, that's just unbelievable.
Not even 20 years ago, 1 year ago.
True.
All right, well, on that note, thanks, you guys. Let us know what topics you want us to talk about next week and moving forward. Again, this is about you guys, not us. So stay in touch. Reach out by email, through our website, through Facebook. You can reach us at Spark Rental anytime. And have a great week.
Have a great week.